here. Mic check. All right, it's working. Mic check. Yeah, that's good. No, I want to do that.
Okay.
Oh.
Someone is recording. I'm so sorry.
There are worse things in the world.
Is that Zach? I wonder who is recording. I can't imagine it's
There
small.
are worse things in the
Well,
world.
okay, we'll see. Also, the worst day ever, I knew it was going to be. Yeah, for some reason the calls will go through. I don't know what that was about.
That was.
I heard your call. I mean, I answered it, but then there was no sound.
Yeah, I was calling back and there was no ringing or anything. So.
But yeah, someone's here to record it, and we'll just, again, it's like a TV studio. You would have had some people here, but it's a tornado warning, it's kind of heavy rain. So I'm sorry, Roger. But yeah, it'll be a.
There, you don't need.
Oh, have you followed that Murdoch thing? Did you
Yes, I saw he got guilty.
Well, I mean, come on, you lied. I wasn't a dog, you know.
They have the whole thing. You were.
Oh, it is.
Hello.
I was waiting for the campus to close.
That didn't happen.
Yeah, and I had asked, I was waiting for the meeting to cancel it, but I'm sorry, too. I thought maybe Zach or that you would sign someone and said, oh, no.
No, not for a meeting thing. Yes, kid. And you want to present from your mind? I didn't present from the Mac, but I have a PowerPoint. I probably need to do something else because I have paper on here. I would like to. Okay, yeah, we'll run the PowerPoint for the computer. Yeah.
It's by the way, Lauren.
Hi, my name's Lauren.
Roger.
Nice to meet you, Roger. My son has been sick all week, and
Oh, my
he
goodness.
was kind enough to share it with me, so I'm sure we're not.
Very nice.
So I'm sure if you need to.
Well, I know I had hoped you would come with the weather, so thank you for coming.
I was already here.
Okay, are you at the Divinity? Are you at TC? Okay, well,
She did take her credit, she's been sitting here for 2.5 hours.
I'm about to say, I'm like, you know, you should, all your professors, what's your major?
I'm a double in writing and theater.
You should get extra credit from all of your professors for.
I should.
I'll vouch for you.
Thank you. You know, I was here for longer because I had one of my classes moved to Zoom, and so I figured I might as well come in.
oh, that's great. I suggested to Roger we just think about this as if he's in a TV studio without a real live audience, but there would have been one.
I mean, I think, you know, there would probably be maybe one or two.
I will be startled if he doesn't show. It's even canceling it, so.
Would you like a clicker for navigating through?
Oh, sure.
Let's see if I brought the bag that has it.
Things where I have this electronic. It's like, just talk.
Unless this is the sort of quiet that comes out of the.
No, they said that once this line came through, that would be it, because it, you know, outside it's already cold.
Okay.
So this is it, except for like, I guess there was a tornado warning in Dallas.
Yeah, but we're under a tornado warning.
We are.
Which is the one that's not, no, we're under watch.
We're-
I think we were under warning, but
There wasn't one here, I didn't see one here.
I never got one, but the
The
sign.
sirens went off, they fired up the sirens, and they were like, oh, I was watching the news, and they're like, oh, well, it's because, to let you all know to get out, from outside, go inside. You know?
But it's pretty scary when they go to the sirens.
I know, I'm like, oh. I haven't heard a siren in ages. Because, you know, they don't really do those in South Carolina.
forgot you were from there.
No, originally from. So.
Tornadoes.
The weird thing is, growing up there, well, there was never one when I was a kid. There was never one when I was a kid, but I never saw it. So I never really experienced. No, there was never one from there, but then again, I did experience that. It wasn't until I was like driving back to Nashville from Atlanta once where I'm driving back and I, get over the mountain and I turn on a local NPR station. And they're like, tornado warning in Murfreesboro. Drive through Murfreesboro to get home. And I'm driving, it's getting darker and darker. Yeah, it was. I think it would be like a couple of people.
I was waiting for you to cancel, but I guess we're going, so that's good.
Well, I was thinking about it, and I said, it's not so bad.
Okay.
So I don't think I could. You've been waiting a while.
I didn't want to go outside.
So,
Dr. Sneed, are you on the side?
no, gosh,
Yeah, we have at least 5 minutes, right?
Yeah.
According to my.
I'm gonna grab something. I left my water in here. You have water?
Yes.
Well, we're recording it, so people can.
Right.
So it's just like we're witnesses in the TV studio. But I'm not gonna lie,
this was taken apart live studio audience.
you know.
Yeah, so where's the camera goes?
Remember those things. Just realize you don't really see that much on television anymore. And I said, well, this was recorded before.
There you are.
Thank you.
Good, sir.
Good to see you, sir.
Okay.
Well, I will wait until at least 7:01, according to my clock, and my correct digital time is 6:56.
It is 6:56, yes.
You see, the space is filling up.
Yes, it is.
I got regrets from.
You're here? Thought you were under the weather. I am. Wow. That's
Good evening. Welcome to all of you to the Spring Carpenter Lecture, which has been almost tornadoed out of window. Happy to see a few of you brave folks, and hope more will see it on the recording. It is my pleasure to introduce to you my former colleague, Roger Sneed, currently professor of religion at Furman University, which, if you've never heard of it, is the preeminent liberal arts college in the state of South Carolina. Professor Sneed earned his BA in political science and also an MA in history at the University of Tulsa, so he is familiar with tornado warnings. MDiv from Cameron School of Theology at Emory, and his PhD from Vanderbilt University under the direction of Professor Victor Anderson. Along with several articles and books chapters, Dr. Sneed has published 2 books. His first book, a revision of his PhD dissertation, is titled Representations of Homosexuality, Black Liberation Theology and Cultural Criticism. And his most recent book was published with the Ohio State University Press and is titled The Dreamer and the Dream, Afrofuturism and Black Religious Thought. Both of these books will inform his lecture this evening. I just want to say a few words ad hoc. I would say that my experience with Roger Sneed is that he's a very courageous person. We all know in terms of LGBTQ issues that there is danger in this identity. In Texas, there is hostility towards these persons identifying as LGBTQ. But South Carolina is even harder place. Think Texas without the major cities. But he has, I would say, with great bravery and grace, work to educate students and the whole community in those places. He's also been the chair of the religion department for some years, and then now is the chair of the faculty at Furman, which speaks to his, I don't know, grace again, and it's foolishness perhaps. But it is a great pleasure and honor to have you here, and we look forward to hearing your talk on queer Afrofuturism.
Thank you, Shelley. First of all, thank you for being a colleague and a friend, and thank you for the invitation to come down here and lecture. I've come to Texas several times. I have friends who were at one point affiliated with TCU, but friends I also knew when they were at Furman, so I am a frequent visitor to the Metroplex, never during a tornado though. So there's a first time for everything. I'm also grateful to the Carpenter Initiative for sponsoring this lecture. So this lecture, and I'll just jump right into it because I really want to get to questions and conversations. My lecture will be primarily about Janelle Monáe as a queer Afrofuturist. So before we jump in, I want to start with the question of what is Afrofuturism? So Natasha Womack in her book, Afrofuturism, The World of Black Sci-Fi and Fantasy Culture, notes that any sci-fi fan, comic book geek, fantasy reader, trekker or trekkie, or science fair winner who ever wondered why Black people are minimized in pop culture depictions of the future, conspicuously absent from the history of science, or marginalized in the roster of past inventors, and then actually set out to do something about it, could arguably qualify as an Afrofuturist as well. So that is the definition or the description of Afrofuturism that is going to inform my discussion about Janelle Monáe as a queer Afrofuturist. Her work via her EP, Metropolis, and 3 full-length albums weave narratives of racial, gender, and sexual freedom together with a sprawling science fiction saga. I contend that her music, the persona and alter ego of Sidney Mayweather, and the use of the android as representing the other is not merely a signifying act that meets heterosexism, homophobia, and white supremacy, but also functions subversively and as a revolutionary queerness. What she performs is a liberated queerness that is constantly seeking deeper responses. Also, her performed queerness, as shown in her songs and emotion pictures, is not subject to others' approval, which I'll get to later. Simply put, I would argue that Janelle Monáe is here to save us from our bigoted myopia via Afrofuturism. My talk this evening will trace the emergence of Janelle Monáe, her working class roots, as the impetus for the creation of Monet, the creation of Cindy Mayweather, and Monet's use of the android as a signifier, and finally her latest album, Dirty Computer, as the culmination of the work that she began when she released the Metropolis EP as a queer Afrofuturistic manifesto. Before I get any further, please forgive me for talking very fast. There's a lot I have to get through, and I don't want us to be here till 10 o'clock. So Janelle Monáe is a native of Kansas City, Kansas, and has often recounted the challenges that her mother faced as a janitor, challenges that led her to an early adoption of the black and white tuxedo as a signifier of the struggles of the working class. Her father was in and out of prison and struggled with drug addiction. And as she notes in a Rolling Stone article, it was her extended family that provided her with a sense of home. Further, she notes that home was not without contradictions. And it is, I think, those contradictions and contestations that enabled Monáe to forge a revised vision of herself. Again, her journey resembles that of so many Black people. She leaves Kansas City for New York City to study drama. And in 2001, she moves to Atlanta, where she met Big Boy of Outkast and later formed the Wonderland Art Society, a collective of like-minded artists. Big Boy introduced Monáe to Sean P. Diddy, or Love Combs, or whatever his name is now, who signed her to his label, Bad Boy Records. So in a sense, what I'm saying is that she, like so many Black folks, leaves the small city town to go to the big city. So for some time, people speculated that Monáe was either bisexual or gay. And in the past, she played with those questions in ways that both avoided the question, but also stood firmly on the side of LGBT expression and rights. In 2013, Monáe was a guest on the radio show Sway in the Morning, an initial attempt by the show's host to get her to reveal her sexuality was met with an unequivocal statement supporting love, regardless of sexual orientation or religious belief. However, Sway pressed the question further and directly asked Monáe if she dated men or women, to which her response typified Monáe's ability to shapeshift. And I'm going to quote her. "You know what? I keep my personal life to myself. I think one of the things about that is that I want everyone to focus on my music, and also I don't want to let anybody down. I want women to still be attracted to me. Go get my album. And I want men to still be attracted to me, so I have to be political in this. I can't really tell y'all," end quote. Now, this interview happened as Monáe was promoting her second album, The Electric Lady. Speculation regarding Monáe's sexual orientation likely stems from the manner in which she presents herself, or rather, the alter ego, Cindy Mayweather, as a nearly androgynous figure. And at the same time, the android Cindy is quite sexual, but not in a gratuitous fashion that centers the male gaze. Both Monáe and Cindy Mayweather's android/androgynous science fictional personas throw mainstream popular culture into the classical estrangement associated with science fiction. To understand what I mean by describing Monáe's work and alter ego as estrangement, I turn to Darko Suvin's description of science fiction as cognitive estrangement. For Suvin, science fiction is subversive because it presents alternative realities that challenge the status quo. In the case of Monáe Mayweather, her presentation of self and the other via the android challenges the hetero-patriarchal status quo. This radio interview that I referenced is an example of attempts to police Monáe's queer body into easily understood or heteronormative boxes and identities. Popular media seeks to maintain gender, sex, and racialized hierarchies in social relations, even as they appear to be open to gender, sexual, and racial difference. Monáe is able to engage these media outlets and simultaneously appear to conform to these mainstream expectations of Black womanhood and femininity and explode them. As writers Delaine, English, and Alvin Kim note, Monáe might be critical of the commodification of her androgyny and then subtle queerness, but she's also keenly aware of its usefulness. She is aware of how 21st century visual cultures process Black women's bodies, and she uses that to confound our expectations. An example of this is found in a 2015 Twitter exchange between her and a Twitter user named @MellowMac. In a since-deleted tweet, MellowMac wrote, "Girls, stop being so soulful and be sexy. Tired of those dumbass suits. You fine, but you too damn soulful, man." Her response was, "Sit down, I'm not for male consumption." Look, this particular exchange highlights Monet's resistance to controlling narratives that assume Black women's bodies exist solely for presumably heterosexual male consumption. And in exploring Janelle Monáe's body of music, I think that Cindy Mayweather, Android 57821, as a fictional alter ego to Janelle Monáe, could engage in critiques of social and sexual transgressions that Monáe herself might not be able to. In other words, I think that Monáe uses science fiction and Afrofuturism as a vehicle to critique contemporary forms of oppression. This is itself one of the hallmarks of science fiction. If you watch Star Trek or Babylon 5 or any other televised sci-fi show, you'll see that science fiction uses these fantastic settings to critique contemporary problems. Prior to Monáe's latest album, Dirty Computer, Monáe's works were characterized as suites. The Metropolis EP was her first suite. Her first full-length album, The Archandroid, was suites 2 and 3. And then the follow-up album, The Electric Lady, was suites 4 and 5. Cindy Mayweather is an android at the center of Monáe's Afrofuturistic saga that comprises the body of work. She is an Alpha Platinum 9000 android living in a sprawling megalopolis where androids perform the labor that the elite humans enjoy the fruit of. This dystopian society also has repressively strict rules that forbid human, robot, sexual, and romantic relations. At the beginning of the first suite, Cindy has fallen desperately in love with Anthony Greendown, a human being. Such a violation is punishable by her termination and disassembly, which sends her into a frenzied attempt at escape from the repressive droid control. Shades of Star Wars. However, this unlikely love story is also the catalyst for Cindy becoming the equally unlikely figurehead of a robot underground and resistance movement. The videos for Monáe's songs, billed as emotion pictures, visually underscore the videos for her songs, underscore the power of her Afrofuturistic visions. For example, the short film for the song Many Moons has Cindy undergoing something akin to a transcendent experience. She is performing for a group of humans engaged in a slave auction of her fellow Alpha Platinum 9000 androids. And Cindy experiences what one might describe as an overload. As the song builds towards a frenetic conclusion, the video shows Cindy attempting to assimilate a vast amount of information. This information, broken down into words, phrases, and images from human history, appears to overwhelm her, and then she begins to levitate. As she ascends into the sky above the audience, she is shot through with some form of energy, and she then terminates. The video ends with a quote from Cindy, quote, "I imagined many moons in the sky, lighting the way to freedom," end quote. The visuals within the Many Moons video, as well as others, point to Monáe's science fiction influences and her positioning the android as a stand-in for oppressed minorities, both racial and sexual. As Monáe moves into her first full-length album, The Archandroid, Cindy Mayweather evolves from love-struck and persecuted android to potential savior figure. The song and video for Tightrope positions the tuxedo-clad Monáe not as an outcast, but as a rebel, flouting the repressive society's injunction against dancing. This calls to mind white supremacist consternation and condemnation of Black expressive cultures. The video for Tightrope begins with a statement, quote, "Dancing has long been forbidden for its subversive effects on the residents and its tendency to lead to illegal magical practices," end quote. Rather than conform to this repressive society and its claims of android/Black inferiority, she and her compatriots, who have been institutionalized at the Palace of the Dogs, dance in secret, calling to mind the hush harbors that were the predecessors of the Black church. Incidentally, in a 2010 interview, Monet claimed that the Palace of the Dogs was an actual place. Again, I see Monet using science fiction and mythological tropes in order to make claims about otherness. And in this interview, she says, quote, I think we're going to live in a world with androids. I think we're going to live in a world with androids, and they'll be able to map out our feelings and our thoughts, and you won't be able to differentiate. And so is the concept of the archandroid, which is similar to the archangel in the Bible and very similar to Neo in the Matrix. You know, the one, the mediator between the hands and the mind, the mediator between the haves and the have-nots, the oppressed and the oppressor. Monet's 2010 claim that the archandroid is like the archangel in the Bible is telling. That the archangel was of high rank and carried the word of God to human beings. Monet uses the archangel of Christian and Jewish lore with the mythic Neo of the Matrix to her android in order to signify that otherness may actually be divine. Not only may this android be a kind of divine figure, its divinity works to bring enlightenment to humanity through love. Now, by the second full-length album, The Electric Lady, Mayweather has evolved even further. The emotion picture for Queen, featuring Erykah Badu, continues the messianic science fiction of the archandroid. In an unspecified time, the Time Council, Metropolis's Ministry of Droids, claims to have stopped the rebel Janelle Monáe, not Sneed Mayweather, and her dangerous accomplice, Badula Oblongata, played by Badu. The Ministry of Droids has created a living museum where various legendary rebels throughout history have been put in suspended animation and placed on display. Again, she's doing all of these callbacks to racist history, i.e. Displays of Black women like Sarah Barton. Two Black women enter the exhibit, subdue the exhibit's guards, and play the song Queen, which awakens Monet, her band, and Oblongata from their suspended animation. Recalling the liberating power of song and dance from title, the video ends with Monet rapping that she cannot be categorized and defies every label, a promise that she later fulfills with the album Dirty Computer. The rap that concludes the song is a challenge to ostracized people to stand up and confront oppressive status quos. Indeed, the title of the song itself is an acronym that Monet explains represents oppressed and outcast peoples. The Q stands for the queer community, the U stands for the untouchables, the E for immigrants, the second E stands for the excommunicated, and the N represents those who have been labeled as Negro. The fourth and fifth suites of the Chase Saga that others in the Neon Valley the fourth and fifth suites of the Chase Saga show that others in the Neon Valley are beginning to stand up and defend Cindy Mayweather. One of the interludes on the Electric Lady is quite instructive. Our favorite fugitive is one of these interludes. It's set in the radio station WDRD. DJ Crash is taking calls from listeners. Many of the calls are quite hostile to androids. The humans calling in express all manner of invective that we in the real world know signifies racist and homophobic sentiments. However, Josh, a student at Time University, asks if the android community believes that Cindy, now called Electric Lady #1, is also the archandroid. As Josh begins to further elaborate that in the book of, the DJ hurriedly cuts him off. This vignette points to the messianic nature of Cindy, and it is clear that Monet is following the mystery narratives within the Gospels and signified in science fiction movies like The Matrix. To center this android is significantly different, even queer. Now, by Monet's third studio album, 2018's Dirty Computer, it seems that she's moving away from the messianic saga that comprised the previous albums. However, upon examining the 45-minute emotion picture that accompanied the album's release, it might also appear that Monet is willing to kill Cindy Mayweather so that Monet herself
can take center stage. That, however, is not the case, as was shown in an interview with the website BuzzFeed that was quoted on the website IO9. Regarding Dirty Computer's place in the Metropolis saga, Monet notes that she had conceived of the album Dirty Computer before the architecture. So the Dirty Computer emotion picture draws on science fiction classics like Blade Runner to create dystopian visuals and sounds. It begins with a voiceover by Monet that describes just how people could be considered dirty. She says, quote, "They started calling us computers. People began vanishing and the cleaning began. You were dirty if you looked different. You were dirty if you refused to live as they dictated. You were dirty if you showed any form of opposition at all. And if you were dirty, it was only a matter of time." End quote. The emotion picture that follows draws on the consequences of the totalitarian they, as powerful elites impose their will upon those labeled as dirty. The use of dirty and clean, especially as they are deployed against the romance between Jane, 57821, and Zen, played by Tessa Thompson, echoes the homophobic discourses of right-wing Christianity. In the dystopian society presented in this emotion picture, Jane and Zen's love is revolutionary. Jane and Zen's love is not brilliant, nor is it sanitized, as evidenced in the emotion picture's uses of the song and video Pink. Later, as the emotion picture uses part of the song Django Jane, Monet raps, "Our android art orchestrated, black girl magic, they can't stand it, we film the future." And using yet another example, based on Star Trek's fictional technologies, the replicator breaks matter down and reforms it into food and clothing. Now, what I think Dirty Computer does is break down components of prior Afrofuturistic and queer productions and reassembles them into a 45-minute mini epic. The emotion picture is the Black woman's reformation, breakdown, and replication of Sun Ra's orchestra. Monet even remixes her own Brite song, deleting Anthony Green and Cindy Mayweather, and the coy around the edges femme queerness. Gone is the romance between an android and a human, replaced by two femme androids loving each other as part of a new queer Afrofuturistic saga. Indeed, the aforementioned Rolling Stone interview opens with Monet shedding Cindy and the metaphor of the android as her alter ego. And she knows, quote, "Being a black queer woman in America," she says, taking a breath as she comes out, "someone who has been in relationships with both men and women, I consider myself to be a free-ass motherfucker." She initially identified as bisexual, she clarifies. But then I later read about pansexuality and was like, oh, these are things that I identify with too. I'm open to learning more about who I am. End quote. And I should note that she now uses she, her pronouns and they, them pronouns. So that is also the signifier of her fluidity of her identity. Dirty Computer, both the album and the emotion picture, serve as Monet's statements about her and other Black women's sexualities. Her freedom to explore herself is not just a personal project. Rather, her work serves as a template for other Black people to engage in the work of personal and communal liberation. So I look at Dirty Computer, Janelle Monae's latest album, and the motion picture, as putting aside the Sidney Mayweather alter ego in order for Monet to more fully live her truths. Monet utilizes the cognitive estrangement of her androgynous queer and sexual selves in order to offer alternatives to rigid narratives of Black identity. And as she works with her sexual identities, her gendered selves, and her musical representations of such, she sonically offers the Black listener and viewer a template for revision of their own selves. The state of constant paradoxical tension identified that we might look at as part of Sidney Mayweather's presentation is itself a site of creative tension and creative possibilities for Black people. Monet's rejection of dualisms and description of herself as pansexual is a rejection of sexual binaries that sever heteronormativity
and cisgender heteropatriarchal structures. To bring in Audre Lorde's uses of the erotic, Cindy Mayweather functions as the other who sees the possibility of embracing the erotic as a primary lens for experience and existence. Cindy Mayweather and the other alpha androids implicitly and explicitly critique society's insistence on perpetuating heterosexism, racism, and homophobia. Monet's first works all played at the edges of the erotic, but in his Dirty Computer as a whole, and a few select songs that delve into a celebration of the erotic, like I mentioned, the song Pink. Widely described as a bisexual anthem, the other song, Make Me Feel, it has a funky bass that is accompanied by a gender-fluid video and no gender pronouns, and it is a celebration of the knowledge that the erotic reveals. Monet combines the Afrofuturistic palette and model of her prior works with frank sensuality and projects a freedom, a dangerous, volatile freedom, much like Texas weather, that can only be experienced through the erotic. The line, quote, "It's like I'm powerful with a little bit of tender, an emotional sexual bender," conveys the ways in which the erotic fuels the construction of a new, liberated self. In an interview with The Guardian, Monet described Make Me Feel as a celebratory song. And further, she said, I hope that comes across. That's not it. I hope that comes across, that people feel more free, no matter where they are in their lives, that they feel celebrated. Because I'm about women's empowerment. I'm about agency. I'm about being in control of your narrative and your body. That was personal for me to even talk about. To let people know you don't own or control me, and you will not use my image to defame or denounce other women. End quote. This power of the erotic is the power to work on behalf of other people's sexual liberation. And in the case of Monet's song and video, she uses late 20th century capitalist logics to affect Afrofuturistic images of liberation for queer and non-binary Black women. Liberation for Monet is celebration, the ability to craft and disseminate celebratory narratives about Black women's bodies through the Afrofuturistic. Make Me Feel, Pink, and other songs and emotion pictures associated with Dirty Computer are Afrofuturistic visual forms of Black female liberation. So I look at Janelle Monáe's queer femme Afrofuturism as a partial fulfillment of the kind of liberation that we might see in Octavia Butler's science fiction and Audre Lorde's revolutionary writings. As I describe Monet as a queer Afrofuturistic savior, it is evident to me that the imagery that she evokes in her songs, emotion pictures, interviews, and so forth, draw on the kinds of messianic tropes familiar to Black audiences. However, her kind of Messiah is not divorced from the erotic. Instead, Cindy Mayweather and Monet herself embrace the erotic, put it front and center, and queer art messianic hopes and expectations. Thank you. Anticipated.
Worried about the windstorm. Is this on?
Well, I thought it was.
I think it's on.
Oh, it isn't. I mean, it just might be mine. Not sure. We have a question from the floor. Go ahead. Go ahead. President Michael.
Thank you. You, I think you've really described, if I understood correctly, the use of science fiction, of fantasy in a very liberative kind of way. And I'm mindful it can be used in the opposite way. It's very oppressive. I'm thinking of Marjorie Taylor Greene and her space lasers. And
Jewish space lasers.
and yeah, Jewish control. And the QAnon, they live in a fantasy world that's very oppressive. So, guidance might you offer people to live in the right kind of liberative fantasy world and avoid the craziness and the oppressive?
I think about that often when I encounter so-called Trekkies on Twitter who espouse homophobic, racist sentiments, and other Trekkies would say, "What show have you been watching?" I think that some people like fantasy or science fiction for lack of a better phrase, the pew-pew. They like the action, they like the spaceships chasing other spaceships, they like the explosions, they like the lightsabers or phasers, and they like to position themselves in the role of the white savior figure. For example, another chapter in my book is on Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and I talk a little bit about how Star Trek kind of had roles. You had, captains James T. Kirk and Jean-Luc Picard, who got basically white men, presumably heterosexual, who are on a starship and their spotless morality, blah, blah, blah. And I think people begin to see themselves as part of those characters and miss the larger messages of such things as Star Trek. So for someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene or QAnon, what I think they see in science fiction is not a liberating possibility. I think they see only the dystopia, and they read that through white supremacy. One of the things that I think I've noticed about this more contemporary bent towards dystopian science fiction in the form of the zombie television show / movie or apocalyptic movies is I think that there's a fear that is framed by white supremacy that then gets read through the disaster or the zombie or the alien. So it's this fear that the black person or the brown people will come and destroy our world, but then that gets told through a science fiction lens. So to your question, how do you get people to see a different vision? You have to deal with their fear. That's at the heart, I think, of someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene or people who are QAnon, that there is an indescribable fear that is tied to how they've been taught about being white and presumably straight. And that anything that says simply, hey, treat me as a human being, then gets read as a threat. I mean, we're in Texas, right? Or when we're looking at people like Ted Cruz and your most unfortunate governor, I look at them and I think, you are governed by fear. And you've had that fear, a steady diet of fear, your entire life. I mean, when we look at places like, every time I come to the Metroplex, I am amazed at how sprawled out it is and how absolutely unwalkable it is. Much like South Carolina, Greenville, South Carolina is virtually unwalkable. And you pass by these subdivisions, these gated communities, and I look at these as kinds of islands of desperation and sadness. And every house had like a protected by CPI or protected by this security system. What are you afraid of? That is the question to get at. What are you afraid of? And that would probably require a beta counselor. I am not that person. Okay, let's pull out what had this steady diet of fear that you have been fed your entire life. Thank you.
Others?
I could say a little bit more about that question.
Well, can I just,
Sure.
but it's a shift, so you follow that up. I am not the most well versed in popular culture, as much as I do know who Jeanette is, mostly from her acting, so I didn't understand that album so much, but I have to say, I've just recently seen Janelle Monáe in commercials for liquor ads, and how do you, I mean, that makes me always a little sad, the pull to, I don't know, capitalist commercial selling. So how, but she does, you know, her marketing of the alcohol, have you seen these?
I have not seen those.
Okay, but the marketing of the alcohol is through the fact that I've always been my own person, right? You know, so that's why I drink this. So I don't know, am I right to be disappointed, or?
I think that it is interesting, and actually, I cut parts out of this because I was like, oh, I was cutting this down because I didn't want this to be an hour and a half lecture, where I mentioned that she uses capitalism to her advantage. So she doesn't present herself as a socialist revolutionary. I mean, prior to this commercial, as she was doing her litter, she was doing commercials, she did things to cover. She had done ads for Pepsi Cola. I don't think she is opposed to capitalism. It can be, I think, disconcerting for many of us who say, okay, this liberation of queerness is also the liberation from capitalism. But I look at her, and it can be a moment where I'm like, I even had this one say, well, are you going to then shift completely, and then was this just a way for you to kind of get a certain kind of cachet, and then you'll just abandon it, and then you'll become like maybe homophobic or something. I wouldn't say you should, how you should feel. I mean, you feel how you feel. I think it bears more analysis. I look at her, I look at Beyonce, and my activities. You forgot to put that in the intro.
Roger Sneed has main floor tickets to Beyonce when she's in Atlanta.
Anyway, that you look at that, or I look at that and say, wow, it would be nice if we weren't in a capitalist society. But since we are, why shouldn't she? Yeah, why shouldn't she make her coin? And what kind of alcohol was it? Like, was it good alcohol? I mean, I don't think it was.
Trying to pull it up.
Yeah.
It's Martell.
What is it?
Martell.
I don't even know what that is.
It's like a cognac.
Oh, it's fancy, I'm sure it's fancy.
See, she's not advertising for Colt 45. So,
And she's beautiful as she advertises.
and I'm kind of like, oh, I want to try this cognac. Not that I really do market.
And they're asking for the recording.
Okay, so, never watched Star Trek, I've never seen, Star Wars, have very little, I don't really follow Janelle Monáe that much either, so, not that I don't appreciate her music, so for someone like me that stepped into your lecture that does not have, the bandwidth for this, futuristic type of, where would you suggest a person begin to explore? Do I need to watch these movies? Do I need to read books by people who have done what you're doing? Because I really just never have liked Star Trek. I don't know what that is. Maybe it's my mother's fault. She never made us watch.
Well, neither did my mother. But I did, and now are you asking about getting interested in Janelle Monáe?
No,
Or science fiction in general?
science fiction and,
Oh,
yeah, Afrofuturism and exploring how many of the tropes and things that you're talking about are packed in there.
Mm. Oh, that's a syllabus. To get started, I would say just simply read Natasha Woman's book, Afrofuturisms. That would be a kind of start. I think that book, Natasha Woman, just go back to that so you can see the reference. That what she's doing is saying, hey, look, there are a lot of Black nerds, or people use the term blurred now, who love science fiction, who love fantasy. That's one way to, you'll read another kind of scholarly, or another treatise. I don't want to say about my book. But I wouldn't want to say, hey, go watch Star Trek if that's just not your thing. If Star Trek just does, is just deadly boring to you, or sitting down to watch Star Wars is just something that would just make you want to climb the walls, then don't do that. In terms of Janelle Monáe, I would say just listen to her albums. You can listen to those albums and not be an Afrofuturist. You can listen to her albums and not be a sci-fi fan. My favorite album of hers is The Electric Lady. And that one song she had she's just doing this go-go. I mean, it's so DC go-go that I'm just in love with that song. I might also recommend do you like reading fiction?
Mhm.
I would recommend Octavia Butler's book, The Parable of the Sower and the Parable of the Talents, or Dawn. Kindred, I have not read Kindred because I just really don't do well with slavery, with anything set in slavery, but her book, Kindred, is about a Black woman in Maryland who time travels from the 1970s into the 19th century. So Octavia Butler is a good this house, love N.K. Jemisin. But then again, I'm reading her book, The City That We Became, so that might be a little, it's kind of like urban fantasy / science fiction, so it might be a little much. It might be. I might say that for advanced sci-fi studies, but I hope that helps.
Thank you.
I would ask another, did you have a question? Good. Hello, I'm Monica Brackett. Thanks for being here. My question, I'm not familiar with Michelle's work. I mean, not Michelle. Janelle's work. I'm not familiar with her work either. But what I was wondering, what it seems to me, and it reminded me of a conversation that I had last week with somebody about coming out. And, during my time in my 30s, there was this whole thing about how to come out and when to come out, all of this. Whereas the younger generation, they don't feel like that's necessary, and it's more of an expression just of who they are. And my question is that something she expresses in her work? This is just who I am.
Yeah, I think that what she's expressing in her work, particularly in Dirty Computers, this is who I am. This is the celebration of who I am. The song Pink is a celebration of the vagina. So it's just, this is who I am. And it's not as dramatic. I think what you're referencing is back in the 80s and 90s, coming out was just this dramatic production. Oh my goodness, it was such a process. You had to tell people, and then there were questions, and then some of us, I came out, went back in the closet, came out again. I mean, this is all early to mid-90s. And coming out then was just such a dramatic, my God, it was like a mini-series.
And not only dramatic, but traumatic.
Oh, absolutely. Because you could never know how people were going to respond. Thinking about what kind of role models we had. We didn't have any out Black people at that time. I mean, well, we did, but they were often relegated to this other kind of fantastic. They're drag queens, or they're this. We don't really pay them any attention. So coming out both as dramatic and traumatic, we had to kind of navigate what does that look like? I think that for someone like Janelle Monáe, coming out is not just a statement of who I am, it's a statement of what our possibilities are. So for her, my interpretation of Monáe, I look at her as instructive and aspirational for all of us. That it's not, oh, it's not this stern drawing, and it's not a whole bunch of, oh, but this is who I am. I'm a free ass motherfucker.
And I'm living my best life, and I'm not doing this to necessarily inform you. It's an expression of self.
Exactly. This isn't about you, this is about me.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Anyone else want to get in? Chief Miller.
So at one point in your presentation, you mentioned that the android came to represent otherness and divine. I'm curious about how much Monet elaborated on spirituality as an important part of their evolution and Afrofuturism for you.
I don't think she is as explicit as in these kinds of circles we might expect about spirituality. I think it is always present in how we might look at the emotion pictures. When I made reference to the song Many Moons in the video that accompanies it, I interpret the end of that video where she's ascending and then self-destructs as a kind of ascension into the heavens. And that for Cindy Mayweather in this video, this information overload in the middle of this slave auction is kind of representing these kinds of dualities of life, these contested aspects of our existence that are both good and awful. And using that history of the slave auction to present a kind of revolutionary transcendence. So I think that when I hear it, if we're going to ask about the question about spirituality, what I experience in listening to the songs is a freedom. Given the point where I'm 52 years old, and when I started listening to her albums, I was in my mid-40s, I think. And for someone like me to listen to somebody new, that is, most of my iTunes playlist is straight up 70s through early 90s. I think my cutoff is somewhere around 1996. So for me to listen to Janelle Monáe, at first I'm like, well, who is this weird woman who's got this pompadour and is giving you James Brown? And the more I listen, I'm like, there's a lot going on here. And that for me became a vehicle for me to talk about pop culture, to talk about Black popular culture in religion and religion. In that for me, I'm like, this music is liberal. This music it sounds free. It sounds unconstrained by whatever is fashionable in the music industry at this time. I was loving how she said, okay, I'm wearing this suit to honor my mother and my grandmother. I'm not going to be dressed in the way you expect me to dress. And it's interesting that in the last year, actually a couple of weeks ago, I saw another person on Twitter who was like, oh, I'm so glad that you're finally showing more skin. Now, I look at the way she's dressing now as part of that liberation. She has shed that particular moment, the Cindy Mayweather moment, and is now moving into a new moment. So when we talk about spirituality, I think that we have to be open to how that evolves, how this connection with that which we consider outside of ourselves is itself never fixed or never static. It actually takes me back to President, what was your last name? I'm sorry, Cooper White. President Cooper White's question about Marjorie Taylor Greene and QAnon. Like, these are people who are stuck. And I look at so many people, homophobic, racist, misogynistic, and all of those things within me. I'm like, okay, that's you being stuck and not being willing or being afraid. You're afraid to consider a new way of being. And I think that whatever we call it, spirituality, religion, at its best, it should lead us to new ways of being that lead us to community with other human beings. So, while listening to Monet's albums, I think that I see those elements in the songs, even if they're not explicitly stated.
Anyone else want to come in? Yeah, oh, good.
I was wondering if there was anything in the works that you've talked about that talks about how queer Afrofuturism relates to reproductive justice or reproductive rights that either Monet has talked about openly or that other people have noticed.
Oh, now that is definitely where you want to listen to the album Dirty Computer. Because I think the song Pink and Make Me Feel, those are all about this liberation of women. The album, Dirty Computer, I would say, is the most explicit about the rights of women and the agitation to control their own bodies. So I think what was kind of hinted at and maybe touched on in maybe a few songs in other albums is really front and center in the album Dirty Computer.
Can you say again when that was released?
The album Dirty Computer came out in 2018.
Okay.
So, and she just dropped a new single called Float. So I don't know if she's coming out with another album or not. So,
Flow was the first one that comes on.
right, because that's the new single that she just released.
This is, did you have another question? So I don't want to take the time, and we should close soon. And so therefore, this is perhaps too long of a question, but it actually is, I think, following up from Dean Miller's question. I was just reading the back, read through pieces of your book. This is it, by the way, The Dreamer and the Dream. But it says here, description of the book, that through the interplay of Black religious thought with science fiction narratives, Sneed presents a bold case for Afrofuturism as an important channel for Black spirituality, and in the process he challenges the assumed primacy of the Black church as the arbiter of Black religious life. That, of course, one of the things I'd love you to say more to. We have, of course, Black church studies at Brite. We have students training for ministry, but we also know that, you know, millennials and younger folks, Gen Z and all, are looking for different kinds of spirituality than traditional ones. But when, in just a few minutes, talk about how your vision challenges the Black church. And,
Okay.
how you booked it.
When I in some ways, this book began as a number of things. One, it began as an essay in which I was, the essay about DS9, where I was dealing with my turn to a particular episode of Star Trek DS9. After Trayvon Martin's murderer was acquitted, after Michael Brown's, and it became a ritual. As a catharsis, I would watch this after a week of news reports of being on social media and screaming, yelling. And I would watch this episode and I would, have the cathartic moment of just crying. The episode Party on the Stars, season 6, episode 13. And students, the other vector is students in my class would often ask, Dr. Sneed, are you religious? And I would ask, well, does Star Trek count? I would ask that to challenge their notion of what constitutes religion, or what constitutes the religious. And often I joke and I say, I know more about Star Trek than I have a PhD in, as evidenced by the trivia night that was on Star Trek, and I got 95%. And I'm still angry about that question I got wrong, although I would argue. But the challenge, and then for me, was leaving the church. So I left the church tried to come back to it, left again. But I think the constant for me has been science fiction. That has been more of a way I frame my life than the church, which for me is more regressive, more aligned with and inured to hierarchies, to status, to class, to all of the isms are in the church. And even, and now people say, well, what about, the LGBT churches, or what about these churches? And then I run up against my own kind of conservatism. Like, I go to these churches, I'm like, you don't sing the hymns right. This is wrong. What are you doing? Yeah, y'all too liberal. I need that 100-member choir with, I need that, but I don't want it. Like, I just listen to the choir. I don't need the sermon. I don't need the sermon, and don't even bother. So, I'm not trying to, if you will, denigrate the church, or what we might call the church. I think that it works for people for whom it works. And I think one of the things that I love about the millennials and Generation Z is that they are calling out the hypocrisies of the church. They are just recently, CeCe Winans did some sort of thing where she's like, well, I didn't sing on Whitney Houston's I'm Every Woman because of the line, secrets that I can cast a spell. And everybody in the comments is like, but ma'am, did you not sing songs with your brother that nobody really knew whether you were singing about Jesus or whether you were singing about your brother? We don't know. So people will call these things out. I think I lost a lot of your question. So could you ask the question again?
No.
Okay.
Just a question of, the relationship of the spirituality that you were holding forth or arguing for in your vision of Afrofuturism versus the Black church. But the bell is ringing, so you
Well, I
know.
just want to say one more thing.
Yes.
I don't want to position this as opposed to the Black church. I want to position this as another way that Black people can enter into themselves. If you read this book, which I have 6 copies,
Just enough.
just enough. If you read this book and say, okay, but you know what? I'm going to Mount Baptist Church on Sunday, and I'm going to also watch Star Trek. Great. If that, in some ways, I'm kind of like Janelle Monáe. Like, I don't want you or anyone to say, Sneed is saying that the Black church is dead. I'm not doing what Eddie Glaude did. He said, well, the Black church is dead. It's not dead. It may need some reformation. And I think it might need Gen Z and millennial pastors to incorporate Star Trek or Janelle Monáe into their sermons. So,
Last question.
okay.
I have a quick question about, are you familiar with First United Church, Second Life?
Is that here in Texas?
It's actually a virtual community with avatars.
No. Well, that's interesting. Again, here's where we see the use of technology creating new ways of being. People using the technologies of Twitter, Discord, and so forth to create new virtual religious and spiritual communities that bring them life.
Yeah, when I say virtual, it's not just digital. It's not just online. It's a virtual community with avatars.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
I was going to mention about the Black church and science fiction. I was just speaking to some youth, and we were talking about something like this, and the power and the strength and the courage that they get from Wakanda, they don't get from the Black church. The Black church is singing a song, that's prayer, that's hold hands. But when you look in that science fiction space of Black Panther and Wakanda Forever, it is Black people empowered, and they were like, we got so much more for ourselves, oftentimes through the you know, the broadening of our imaginations and seeing ourselves in ways that obviously we see ourselves in. And so it was interesting to me because these young people don't go to church because the church wanted to kind of sit down on their revolutionary movement in the world. And so it's interesting that in that conversation with them, I get that kind of sensibility that there's a strength that's offered to them in that imaginative space, which has some historical, you know, whatever, but.
Well, I have a chapter on Black Panther in the book. And I remember when I went and saw Black Panther the first opening night, and when the royal talon goes into Wakanda and you see the Golden City for the first time, I started crying. Because this is what I wanted. I want to see me. You know, I don't really need to filter myself through a Jean Picard or a James T. Kirk. Actually, I was more identified with Spock anyway, so. So, you know, I now have a window or a mirror that reflects me, that reflects them. I mean, I can see myself in this movie. And there was a colleague, and you might remember Cherie Maid in the Fresh Department. We had a kind of running joke about how many times we were in a competition to see how many times we were going to see Black Panther. She beat me. She saw it 13 times, and I only seen it 12. And I was like, oh. But I bought it on every platform, except for VHS. That was a moment. 2018 was a moment in terms of looking at Black culture, this integration of Afrofuturism is part of it. I mean, I look at Beyonce as incorporating Afrofuturism in a lot of what she does. Even if she doesn't.
I'm not a fan of Beyonce. I don't like Beyonce.
Oh, dear. Well,
I'm just messing with you.
well, I was like, no one's perfect. But I look at what she does in a lot of things, and I think, okay, here's where I see elements of this, even if she's not saying, okay, this is the aesthetic. But I think I saw us as Black people. I mean, we made that movie get $1 billion before it even opened in China. And I think that Marvel was worried that it wasn't going to make that. We made that happen. We showed up on that Thursday evening, all dressed. I mean, I wore all black. And then when Wakanda Forever came out, we said, okay, you have your marching orders. This is what you wear. You got to wear all white to the funeral. I didn't. It's like hideous and all white. But you know, seeing Wakanda Forever, that was the first movie I'd seen in the theater since. And I was like, and it's so far been the only movie I've seen in the theater since. We are at a point where we're seeing ourselves and we're able to create visions of ourselves, be it through horror, through, I mean, Jordan Peele and Get Out. Oh, my goodness, if I were a horror, to my colleagues who do horror, I'm not that person. Like you don't do, I don't do horror. But it is exciting to see us doing these things. To have seen Wakanda, to see Queen Rwanda, and she better get that Oscar, to see Angela Bassett do the thing. I've tried to put it in words. I don't even think the words are sufficient to capture the moment.
We indulge a marketing moment.
Yes, okay.
So that the folk watching, listening, or will hear can know that the good professor is doing an intensive for us at the end of May in queer theology. So I invite all persons who are excited about this evening to register for the course near the end of May. Thank you very much for having agreed to do that course.
Yes, I think that's a good way to close. Thank you for coming and braving the tornado warning. I hope students do watch the recording.
So, can you send it to me?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, it's a great YouTube channel. Okay, thank you to you all and have a good weekend.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you all.
Oh, yes, yes.